Hello everyone, this is Sabita Sunkara and today's SQL interview question is how would you troubleshoot a SQL agent job failure in production? So this is one of the most frequently asked interview questions for 10 plus years experience SQL developers, especially if you are worked in production support or ETL projects. So the interviewer is not checking whether you know how to create a SQL agent job. They are checking whether you can handle a real production incident under pressure. So let's understand this with a real time scenario. In the in You have to imagine that it's at 2 a.m. You are the on call production support engineer. Suddenly, you receive a high priority alert saying that the daily SQL agent job has failed. So, because of this failure, customer reports were not generated and ETL process has stopped. Also, business dashboards are empty. Then the morning business team is waiting for the data. Now the interviewer asks, how would you troubleshoot this issue? Many people immediately say, I will restart the job. But that's the wrong approach. As a senior SQL developer, the first rule is never restart a failed job without understanding why it got failed. Then investigation we have to do. So the first thing we have to check is the SQL agent job have history. Then we have to verify which job got failed and at what time did it fail. Then which step was failed. Then what is the exact error message. So sometimes only one particular step fails while the remaining steps are fine. So next we have to open the job properties and review the failure step carefully. Then we have to verify the command if it is there. Then we have to check the stored procedures or SSIS package path or any parameters or issuing and output logs. So after that we have to check the SQL server error log. So many server related issues such as login failures, database offline errors, disk problems or memory issues are recorded there. So then we have to check the Windows event viewer. So sometimes the issue is not with the SQL Server at all. It could be an open operating system service failure, so disk issue or network problem. If the job executes an SSIS package, we have also reviewed the SSIS catalog logs to identify package failures, data flow errors, lookup failures, or connection issues. So finally, we have to verify whether all required source files have arrived correctly. Sometimes the job fails simply because the expected input file is missing, empty, or in the wrong format. At that stage, we have enough information to understand where the failure occurred. Then the root cause analysis is now it's time to identify the actual root cause. So, one common reason is that the source file did not arrive on time. Sometimes the file is present but it's 0 KB or corrupted file or its format has changed. So, the next possibility is a database connectivity issue. So, the database server might be unavailable or login credentials may have expired or permission might have changed. Then another common cause is server resource issue. For example, disk space is full or memory is exhausted or CPU usage is very high or temp DB is full. So performance issues can also cause job failures. So long running queries, blocking sessions, deadlocks or command timeouts may stop the job from completing. If the job uses SSIS package level problems such as lookup failures, data conversion errors or missing variables can also cause failures. So sometimes the SQL agent job itself is configured incorrectly. So wrong schedules or incorrect job step commands or invalid parameters or failed dependent jobs can all result the job failure. So the key point is never assume the cause. Always verify it with the logs and evidence. Then once we have identified the root cause, begin the resolution. If the issue is missing source file, you have to first confirm with the upstream team and validate the file before restarting the process. If it is a database permission issue, or we have to restore connectivity or correct the required permissions. When possible, we have to test only the failed step instead of rerunning the entire job. This saves time and prevents unnecessary reprocessing of data. So, before running the job, we have to validate all input parameters on control files and configurations. So, once the job completes successfully, we have to compare source and target row counts to ensure all expected records were processed. Then, we have to review the audit tables to confirm batch status, execution time, and any warning messages. So, next, we have to verify the downstream jobs reports and dashboards have completed successfully. So finally, we have to update the incident ticket with the root cause, the solution implemented, and the preventive actions taken. A production incident is not complete until the business confirms that everything is working correctly. Then now let's answer this exactly as we would in an interview. If the interviewer asks, how would you troubleshoot a SQL agent job failure in production? So when a SQL agent job fails in production, I follow a systematic troubleshooting approach. First, we have to check the SQL agent job history to identify the failed steps and execution time and exact error message. Then we have to review the job properties, SQL Server error logs, Windows Event Viewer, and SSIS logs if applicable. Then we have to verify input file availability, the database connectivity, also login permissions and disk space, server resources, blocking sessions, and dependent services. After identifying the root cause, we have to fix the issue, test the failed step whenever possible, and rerun the job. Finally, we have to validate the data using row counts and audit tables, ensure downstream reports are generated successfully. Then document the root cause and communicate the resolution to the business team. A SQL agent job failure is not just a failed job. It can directly impact customer reports, ETL process, business dashboards, and daily operations. So, as a senior SQL developer, our responsibility is not only to restart the job but to identify the root cause, resolve the issue safely, and validate the results and prevent the same issue from happening again. That's what distinguishes a senior SQL professional from someone who only knows SQL syntaxes. So, thanks for watching. Follow for more advanced SQL interview questions with real world production scenarios. Thank you.